All right, welcome ladies and gentlemen, creatives of all ages to the Maxon booth. I'm Matthias, AKA Major VFX on all the social media platforms. We are here showcasing amazing artists from around the world who've come to showcase how they do what they do with Maxon One products. For those of you who don't know, we stream live, hi internet, all of our friends in the interwebs at 3dmotionshow.com monthly, and we have continual ongoing trading. So sign up on 3dmotionshow.com. We're giving away thousands of dollars worth of prizes. That's at the end of the season. And up next, my good friend, amazing artist, Arturo Wong. Arturo, take it from here, brother.
My man. Thank you, Maxon. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Like he said, my name is Arturo Wong. I am a senior motion designer and art director based in Los Angeles, California. And for over 10 years, I've been specializing on motion graphics, mostly utilizing Cinema 4D, After Effects. And to better explain and show what I do exactly, feel free to go to my website, arturowong.com. You're going to see more content and past projects that I've worked in the past. My Instagram, try to upload there things from time to time, Arturo Wong. But for this presentation, I put together a quick demo reel here, if I can find it. And here we go. That was it. Thank you. As you guys saw, my skills vary. Most of the time I get to work on graphics packages, but I had the opportunity to work on music videos, movies, live events. Super fortunate to work with big teams such as Big Block, which is the next part of this presentation to show you what I'm going to be demonstrating. I had the opportunity to work on the rebranding package of MLB for TBS. And with the team at Big Block, Robert Sella, Sabrina, Kevin, if you guys watching, miss you guys. But without further ado, let's just let me show you the Cecil that they created. And that was the Cecil for MLB rebranding package for TBS. Like I said, it was a great group. The previous presenter, Brian Coleman, was one of the guys that was also part of the team designing some of the glove transitions. Part of my responsibility was to animate and come up with different ones, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. How did I create it and animated this tear cloth effect using Cinema 4D native tools. And And yeah, explain a little bit of like the process and like how easy it is to like just come up with a setup where you can utilize this effect in your projects. It's been an effect that it's been there for a while. I've used it in the past for ESPN, for other projects. But without further ado, let's just jump into Cinema 4D and let's get the show started. So here, we just have our base scene. I'm gonna middle click this. I'm gonna go to my model object here, just the regular bat. And let's start naming things here so we don't get confused. We're gonna create a basic setup, which will have 3 objects here. The main one will be the main bat that will be used for rendering, just for reference purposes. The second one will be our cloth tear object, and then the third one will be creating a proxy that will help us with the speed of our simulation. So quickly, I'm going to hold Shift and Alt and click on this guy so that we can hide him. And the only thing that we want right now is the cloth bat object that we have here. One of the first things that I look when I'm about to do simulations is the mesh that I'm going to be working with, because that's going to be depending. That's going to depend. The timing of the simulation is going to depend on how busy that mesh is. So for this particular object, what I would like to do is go here and create a remesh. And while having selected the object, I'm going to hold down Alt and let go on remesh so that it can become the parent and the effect will be applied. We're just going to give it a minute for the effect to happen. And as you can see now, it has been remeshed with quads that are more evenly separated, and it will help with the simulation to come out more organic and natural. So what I want to do just for speed purposes right now, I'm going to reduce the density to 70%. Give it a minute. There we go. Press C just to collapse everything. We're going to rename this guy one more time. Cloth tear, just cloth. Whoops. There we go. With that, we have already the setup for our bat cloth. I'm thinking of Bart for some reason here, I guess because we're in LA. For the second part, for the proxy. Now, right here, what I want to do is, like, I don't care too much about the topology as long as this is going to be a low poly object, which I will be maybe able to use it as a collider object, but in general, I don't want to have too much polygons, because then that's going to take the simulation to, it's just going to take longer to process. So we're going to come here to our polygon reduction object. Immediately, the mesh is going to be a mess, but that doesn't matter, because as long as we have a lower poly count, that's all we care about right now. Once again, once it's done, I want to see. Shift-G to ungroup and delete that group. We don't need it anymore. We're going to hide it, and we're going to go back to our bat cloth, and we're going to start with the trigger of this simulation. For that, I'm going to go to my point mode. I'm going to hold V, select, go down to set vertex weight. We're going to leave that at 0 since we're going to be using fields. Go to basic, use fields, delete this freeze, and let's start. So right now, all I want to do is create my first trigger, which will be the spherical. This is what it's going to be driving the whole animation. And the reason why I'm using vertex maps is just because of the flexibility that it's going to give me once I'm going to start animating. If I want this tear to start from here, from the middle to the end, I have that flexibility, because at the end of the day, the simulation is going to be driven by this vertex map. So let's go ahead and animate this from 0 all the way until the end. I just want to get it big enough to cover the entire bat. And boom, I'm done. Now, what I want to do is create a shader field. You guys probably seen this setup before. All I did right now is just change the blending mode of this shader field to overlay, and I'm going to add a noise. And as you can see here, you can already start seeing the feedback from the viewport. I'm going to press NA to get a better view of this texture, and change the noise to, oh, I can definitely not pronounce that name, S2UPL. So this is the guy that we're going to be using right now. 250 here. We're going to increase some of these parameters here. Just play around. This is the time for you to like just find what works better in your project. And if you want to take it even a step further, you can even animate this noise. If we press play, just to see what we have so far, you're going to see that it's very subtle, but you can see that animation going. That's going to just create a little bit more turbulence in your tearing effect, which is going to end up being, it's going to make it look more natural. One more effect that I'm going to put here, and I'm going to explain why I'm doing it, is this invert modifier. And we're just going to leave that for now. And the next thing that we want to do is just start with a simulation. So for that, we need this, the tags that we're going to be using for this is going to be the cloth tag, of course, and then we're going to need a belt, cloth belt. This cloth belt is going to help us. It's going to be used in combination with a vertex map to drive the animation of the terrain. So what I want to do right now is that select everything, all my points, while having the cloth belt selected. I'm going to click and drag this bad proxy into the belt, because those vertices are going to be built onto that proxy. We're going to press on set. Immediately, those points are going to become bright yellow, meaning that all of them now are attached to that proxy. Now, for very visualization, I'm going to just uncheck that draw checkbox there. Go to my terrain, to my cloth tag, and go to my object mode here and see more or less what we have so far. Okay, it's growing, nothing's happening, of course, because right now everything is attached to that proxy. So what I need to tell to that belt tag is that we wanted to use this vertex map, and I'm going to press on it so you guys can see what's going to happen. That right now, this vertex map is having full influence in the entirety of this bed. As it becomes red, now the cloth tag is going to start taking action, and it's going to start doing its thing. Now, so far we're just having the setup, the base setup for us to start playing with all these parameters. Right now it's just falling, so let's change that. Let's change this gravity to -2 maybe. The other thing that we want to do is we want to enable the use tear effect, since we're going to be tearing this puppy apart. And for that, we're going to be using a couple of forces. So we're going to come here to simulate. I ended up using an attractor and a field force. I'm going to drag these guys down here just so I can better see them. Now, the attractor is doing what his name says. It's just going to attract either particles or the cloth, all of them to the middle, to wherever this attractor is in 3D space. So what I want to do is, instead of attracting them to the middle, I want this to be an explosion. So we're going to create here a negative value of 150, make it violent. I'm going to go to my displays, first of all, for my field force. And while holding shift, I just want to make sure that that cage is covering the entire bed. So that ensures that the effect is happening throughout the entirety of my bed and not just in a certain area. Now, this field force right now is not doing anything. We need to tell it to use an object. And what this object is doing, depending on the normals, and that's why I selected the mode to surface, the normal of the polygons of this bed is going to push the cloth outwards, which is going to create, at least for my case, an effect in which hopefully none of the mesh that is the cloth is tearing is going to be intersecting with the bed. That way, I want to try to avoid having to use a simulation tag cloth collider, just so that like my simulation can go faster. So let me show you what the end result will be for this, and we're going to tweak here a couple parameters so that you can better see what's happening. The radius, it's just telling it how much I want that force to push away, and then the strength, of course. We're going to start with maybe 500 here on the strength, and then take it from there. You can see visually what's happening. And let's go ahead and press play. Hopefully we see some tearing, and the mess starts. Now, this is happening because Cinema 4D is telling you that right now I need a cloth surface in order for you to see the terrain. So the second that I apply it, and once again, is while having the object selected and holding Alt, letting go on the object, it will automatically create it as a parent of that object that was selected. Now we can see the terrain. Now we know that our base setup is working, and now it's time to play. Let's start getting the look that we want. Right now, I'm having all these different chunks, and I want to go for something more organic. So what I want to do is maybe increase this parameter to 180. I'm going to also hold Shift and Alt on this field force and attractor so that like they're not distracting here on the viewport. And also, I'm going to enable my main bat, the one that we're going to be using for reference. Double click here to create a material. Let's change the color. This is just so that we can differentiate the terrain from the bat. Now, this is happening because the main bat, and the terrain, the mesh are both sharing the same 3D space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the vertices of the cloth out a little bit so that they're not intersecting anymore. Like so, we're just adding a little bit of thickness. And like that, now we know that they're not going to be intersecting anymore. Once again, I'm going to press play. And now we're starting to have the terrain that we need. Okay, so now, finally, once you start like getting done with this guy, like what you're going to be ended up doing is adding a subdivision surface, probably using a Redshift tag that will smooth things out, make it pretty, make it sexy. But for now, this will just be used as a reference point to more or less art direct what's going to happen at the end. So once again, I'm going to press Shift-G, delete that subdivision for now, and get this to a point that I'm happy with. There is no much talk other than this, just like the part of like just like this is the basic setup for you to like start playing around with it, getting the exact simulation that you want. Like I said, like at the beginning, by using this spherical field, we can move this to like the beginning and control how the effect is going to occur. And that's the powerful thing about this setup, like its flexibility. So once you're happy with the simulation that you're having, the last step that you want to do before taking this into the rendering part will be to like export that, bake this animation basically. So for that, we're going to be using an Alembic file. And notice how like before I went to export, I clicked on the object that I wanted to export. Because as an Alembic file, on the regular options, it will give you this option right here, which is select only. Selection only will do exactly what it says. It's just going to export this object in particular. Otherwise, if it's not selected, it's going to export your entire scene, which you don't want to do. The second thing that you want to check is the frames that you're going to be exporting. In this case, I want the entirety of my simulation, and everything else can stay as default. Once you press OK, it's going to tell you where do you want to save the file so that you can re-import it. So let's go ahead and go to the scene that I had after this. Files. Boom, boom. There we go. Now, at this stage, I have already brought the baseball with the animation of this explosion and the terrain that we created. Now, if we put this together with the camera and the Alembic, now we have the flexibility by using that Alembic to like art direct this a little bit more, animating the offset, animating the timing for your needs. Now, another thing that I want to say about this is that when I was creating the cloth terrain, I'm going to press ND to see the mesh and deselect this, guys. The density of the mesh will play a part in how the simulation is going to go. This mesh right now is very evenly, and the results were the ones that you guys saw. But in here, if I press ND once again, you guys are going to see that this is a way denser mesh than the ones I had before. And even more, I ended up subdividing this area right in the middle where the ball was going to be colliding with the bat just to get a better tearing than before. Now, if you don't have enough polygons and you're just doing the tearing, all those chunks, all those quads flying around are going to be more noticeable. They're not going to be as organic as cloth will react. And that's the reason why I ended up subdividing this area only, since this was going to be the main focus. Okay. Now, once this is done, the animation is done, animation is approved. I went ahead and started to create all these materials. Right now, I'm not going to go in depth into like how to bring all these materials into Cinema 4D, but I want to go over, once you're done texturing, part of my workflow is to, before I even press render, make sure that I have all the AOVs that I need to make my life easier in compositing. For that, I'm going to go to Redshift, AOVs, and open the AOV manager. I'm also going to be closing this window now, and I'm going to bring my Redshift render view. Let's go to a nice frame here, maybe here. And in this render view, most of the time, this is how I like to work within Redshift, changing these options to like fixed scaling. And the way that it works is that this percentage, the first one, will control how big the image will be on your viewport. And the second one, it will be how big the image it is in the like how big the image is calculated in the render time. So if I were to change this 50% to 100%, the time of this render will be the exact same thing as my normal render. But if I change that to 25%, now I'm telling Cinema, I don't want to have the full render, I just want to have a little preview. And that's all we're going to do that for this part of the process. I'm going to let it go do its thing. And in order for me to see the AOVs that I'm going to be needing for compositing, you need to enable bucket rendering. So right now, we're looking at the beauty pass. We're going to be talking about the depth pass and puzzle mats. They're super easy to set up. I already have them here. But to show you, all you need to do is just for a puzzle mat, click and drag, rename it. And now you will have the mode and the options to either get the puzzle mat for a material ID or an object ID. Material ID, very straightforward. All the way at the output, you will have the material ID number that you want to use, and you have the channels that those are going to be assigned to. Same thing with the objects that you're going to be using. Let's say this guy, we want to have a mat just for the main bat here. We already have a tag, which we're going to need in order to change the object ID number. Okay, so let's create this from scratch. Redshift object, go to object ID, enable it. I'm going to set that to 4. And right here, you can either change the red, green, and blue channel, all of them to 4, to get a white image, as you can see. Or if you have multiple objects, you can assign them to different channels. Now, this will be mostly depending on like preferences. If you just want to work with one file, this will be the way to go. I'm sorry, the way to go if you want to have one file will be if you want to assign this to a 4 to the red channel, 3 to the green channel, and like the other objects to the corresponding channels, and then you will have one file with all the mats that you need. If you go just with 444 here, chances are you're going to have to create one puzzle mat for each object that you have in the scene. But again, that's part of preference and like how you like to work with this file. The next thing that I like to do before pressing rendering is going once again to my render settings, going to the output, verifying all the goodies, right? That resolution is what I want. I'm using all the frames right here, my frame rate. And here on my save tab, I will make sure that everything is going where it's supposed to go. And this is part of my preference. There's many plugins out there that like will allow you to bring 3D data from Cinema 4D into After Effects. Me personally, because I'm old school and I started that way, I just got used to it. I like to save an AEC file that will contain all the renders that are gonna come out from Cinema 4D and all the 3D data that I'm gonna need in order for me to do my compositing. Once all that's set up, I will go ahead and render this scene and bring that into After Effects. Now, let's watch one more time. The final result. And talk about this for a second. At this point, all I'm going to get from Cinema 4D is going to be a depth pass. I'm going to get mattes in order for me to control the look if I want to, just to do more iterations. So that way that like concept design can just go faster and I don't have to go back into Cinema 4D and re-render more versions. And I ended up adding those overlay 2D graphics just to add a little bit more hype, get that feeling of like, oh, these are sports. Let's go. So let's go back to After Effects and start compositing. I'm just going to quickly show you like the end result here. Let's see. This is the very basic. This is the base of like the renders that I did. And from here, I started to do more iterations, having the explosion coming from the left, from the top, from the back, adding smoke all the way in the back, etc. So what I want to do is just like, as you can see, I ended up using looks, depth of field, and a bunch of like this 3D data that came directly from Cinema. And the way that it works, let me see if we can have it here, is that once the render is done, files, there we go, you will get this AEC file, whatever you saved it to. So right now, I'm just going to click and drag this file. It's going to come in here with all the renders that you did. Right now, I just put a 1 because like these renders were already saved. But all I needed from here was the 3D camera and all the nulls that you will need. So let's say right now, I just got this camera. I forgot to like bring some nulls. All I need to do is just go back to Cinema 4D, create a couple more nulls for have a visual representation once I bring those into After Effects so that I can make my life easier for compositing, something like this. Go to Render, External Compositor, and I will press Save one more time, Control V, go back to my Save Project file here to get the AEC, and I'm just going to replace that file. It's going to say yes. Give it a minute. Go back here. Now I don't need these files that came with it. And I just need to re-import this guy up in the files. And as you can see now, we have the nulls that we need in order for us to do the compositing that we're going to be using. Now, these nulls can be used to add smoke, to add like more environmental effects on the background, anything that you need in order to get the look that you want. I'm going to delete that. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to start something from scratch, just to show you the process of like what are the most essential things that I use in my personal workflow. So while holding this render, I'm going to drag it into this composition to create a new one. In here, I'm just going to drag every pass that we had before. We have right now the beauty, the depth of field pass, and our puzzle mat. Okay? Those are the files that we're going to be working with right now. So what I'd like to do before I even start something is rename the main beauty main. Control D for us. I'm going to duplicate that main file for as many mattes that I have in the scene. And In this case, I only have 3. So I'm going to duplicate that a couple more times. And we're going to start renaming this accordingly. So this could be bat tear, ball main. And we can call this ball main 2. All right. Now we can disable it. And what we're going to do now to use those puzzle mats, we're going to go to the effects tab. If I can find it here. And we're going to look for an effect called set mat. I'm going to double click it. I'm going to expand this window here a little more to just like better see my project. Okay. Now what set mat's going to do is basically it's just going to isolate an item depending on the information that you're giving it. So right now we're going to select the puzzle mat, and we're going to select the channel that we want to use. And we're going to isolate this so that you guys can see what's going to happen. So the bad tear, if we go back to our puzzle mat, we see that is the blue channel. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to come back here, change the alpha to blue. And right now it's all isolated, and it will come up with the alpha. So now you're ready to just like apply any effects to this particular layer in your composition. And we're going to be doing the same thing for the other ones and changing the channels accordingly. So for the main one, I'm going to select this guy, Control V. If my memory doesn't fail, I think it was the green one. Yes, it was. We go to the second one. And right here, Control V to copy the effect. Go to the red channel, and there we go. Now, this is what, like, for me, will be the main setup as far as like compositing, and then from here I will go into color correction, depth of field, and all those goodies. So let's start with that. We're going to create first of all a null, so Control Y to create one. Change the color from just want a black background here. I'm going to put it all the way at the end. Should rename it. Holding Control Y, Control Alt Y. I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and the first one that we're going to be doing is depth of field. I'm going to duplicate this one more time for color correction, and one more time to add looks. For depth of field, what we're going to be using is a plugin by Redshift. Redshift depth of field. Me personally, I love this plugin. For depth of field and compositing in After Effects, it makes your life so much easier, and it really brings those like nice depth of field. So if you were to use the regular like After Effects like depth of field, you will notice how like in the edges sometimes it will just bleed that blur. With Redshift, it just doesn't happen. It's a more accurate, I guess, like algorithm or software or process. So what I like to do is once I have my plugin here is go ahead, go to the depth buffer, press invert, select the facets here to 6, and reduce the rounded facets to 0. So that way we know that we're going to be sharp, and increase the radius to something crazy just to make sure that it's working. We're going to select now the depth paths that we had from Cinema 4D. And right now, if you click on this guy, select depth, it's going to tell you what part of the image do you want it to have in focus. So right now I press on the bed, and as you can see, that's nothing that really has happened. So what I like to do is also enable here my depth layer, effects and masks, go to my depth path, and now we can see that the reason why we don't see that shallow depth of field is because the render that came in doesn't have that contrast that we need in order for us to see that really nice depth of field. So while enabling that that option here for effects and masks, After Effects is telling this plugin now to use whatever effects I have on this layer. So once again, we're going to come here to my effects. I'm going to create just a regular curves effect. And I'm going to crank these values just to get a little bit more contrast. And you can start seeing now the difference that like the before and after. Something that is more flat towards something that has more contrast. And you can animate that, which I ended up doing too, just to like a little bit art direct more where like that depth of field was gonna be. So something like that. Go towards the end. Everything is super dark, so I'm just gonna move this curves to like get a little bit more contrast. Go back to the main look. And I make this thing full so we can see more. And now we can start seeing, like, I don't know if you guys can see it there in the monitor, but like here at the end, on the back, now we're starting to see that more of that like shallow depth of field that I was talking about. If I went to this effect, we can see the before and after, you will see a difference between what we had before and not. And this really brings more attention to like the information that you want to present, right? So, and from here, you can just play around with the focus to create more iterations. That's what I ended up doing. I ended up having the focus all the way in the back and cranking these values up crazy just to get like this part like super out of focus, and then animating the focus point to the front to get that change of focus. So for my CC, my color correction layer, I just like to create two effects, a hue and saturation. Let's bring it here. And curves. Okay. With this, I will just add tints. I will just adjust the contrast just to bring a little bit, to have that like crisp back. Sometimes when we start adding more effects, it's gonna start getting more washed out. So like I just like to have this handy in order for me to create anything. Now, the reason why at the very beginning I ended up separating all these guys, like I said, these maps, you can see how useful this can be for compositing while having it all separated. Let's say my art director comes to me and he says, you know what, Arturo, I want this to be red or something. Now I don't have to go back to Cinema 4D, wait 4 hours for my render to come. I can just come here and quickly change the color. And you will see that now here in the compositing part. Regularly, depending from project to project, you might need like reflection maps, specular maps, other maps that you might need for compositors. For me personally, most of the time I can just get away by getting a puzzle mat and separate and isolating that object so that I can apply all the effects that I want. You can add here to your, just add a regular curves if you want to add more contrast. You have just more control as far as like art directing your project. Lastly, what I did is like with the files that came from Cinema, I will bring those back into my regular composition for this 3D part. And what I need that 3D data for is because the creative director came to me and was like, you know what, the black on the back, we need to create something that will look more atmospheric. We need to bring life to that environment. So maybe we should add some smoke. That's what I ended up doing at the end. So let me borrow the smoke that we had on the other projects. Right here. Just gonna copy and paste this guy's here before the bad, since they're all the way in the back. And because right now we have the 3D data from Cinema 4D, this guy, the smoke layers that we have here have already been properly positioned in 3D space. I'm going to change this to custom view. And I think it was, oh, there we go. Let's find our layers here. And as you can see here, this couple layers have been already placed in 3D space to help our environment come to life and have something other than just like a pitch black on the back. Once I was done with this, And most of the main setup was done. Going back to looks just to add that final touch. And this is the thing, looks is so powerful for that particular purpose. As far as iteration goes and approvals of looks, once animation is approved, now the part of concept and lighting on like what else can we do to create different versions of this animation without having to go back to Cinema 4D and spend more hours to it. I'm gonna go here to the main looks and like just go for something that like will go along these lines. Now the whole package in general had like this very like nighttime dark reflections, so we're gonna keep going with that. I'm gonna go to a nice frame so that I can see this better. Maybe here, where we can see the logo. Maybe there. Go back to my looks, and now press edit so that we can see what we're gonna be working with in there. And now here's the part where like you just go ahead and start choosing the effects that you want to use for this. Let's just scroll around, see what we can work with. Maybe something like this will do. Doesn't need to be perfect as long as you just have a main setup here. You can go back to the tools here and start adding more to it. I'd like to add maybe a diffuse. Where is my man? Optical diffusion. Oh, different icon. There we go. Just adding it to add like that nice diffuse on this like highlights. Maybe add a little bit of chromatic aberration at the end. Go back to the parameters of that aberration and set that to -0.5. Just something subtle. Press OK. And something that I like to do is just reduce the strength of that looks, something 80%, just to like preserve some of that sexy lady that came from Cinema 4D and not take it over by just looks. One of the things that I'm looking right now here is, for instance, this baseball right now looks too dark for me. Something that probably the creative director will tell me, now I don't have to go back to Cinema and re-render it because we have the matte for that. We can just adjust that here. We identify what layer it is. We're going to come here at curves. Increase the brightness of it. Let's wait for a little bit. And there we go. Once again, I'm going to show the final result. And you will see all the iterations that I ended up doing just with one particular render. I ended up doing 3 different renders, and those 3 different renders ended up being 16 different versions that I came up with. Some of them were super subtle, some of them were completely different, but most of them had that relationship with like the look that we were going for, and made it easy for my approval process. And that was it. Once I rendered that out, we were ready to go. Once again, for last time, this is the final result of the entire package. There we go. That's my time with you guys. Thank you for staying all until the end with me. Once again, my name is Arturo Wong. If you guys want to follow me, catch up, ask me questions on Instagram directly from my website, you let me know. I'm here for you.
Awesome. Amazing job, Arturo. Very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. We're going to be pulling in questions. The internet has been so well behaved. I feel like everybody's done such a good job presenting that they've, they shied away from questions. They're just like, I get it. I can follow. But there were a couple questions for you too. But we're going to start off with the live audience, which has been super shy today as well. Come on, it's okay. It's all right. He's not going to call you out. But if you do have questions, Arturo is going to be in the back for another hour, so we'll be able to take any questions. So, question from the interwebs. Hello, interwebs. Wonder if this would work similarly adopted to a new cloth dynamic, or if it's a specific setup for the old cloth system. So, what version did you do this in?
So when I first started using the same simulation, it was on R23, and since R23 to R25 it's been the same. On R26 it's been upgraded, so like most of the tools that you will find on R26 will be different now. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but they're the same, they're more powerful, you have more options, you have more parameters to play with, but up to R25 it was always the same.
Okay. So maybe a little bit more flexibility with the options, but still the same process.
Exactly, it's always the same process.
Cool. And then the last one is just on your render setups. Do you ever render out motion vectors for motion blur?
Yes, absolutely. Me particularly, I won't use motion vectors because I usually use Real Smart Motion Blur in After Effects. Motion vectors will be mostly asked for if I'm working at a big studio and they're asking me, like Nuke department, like compositors, they will be like, please give me vector passes so that I can add motion blur, like in post. That will be a place in which I will have to use that, as well as like, deep rendering and all that good stuff for compositing.
But if you're going solo, you usually just take Real Smart?
Yes, just Real Smart. At least for me, I try to like make sure that like my workflow is fast, so that way I can get feedback fast. Real Smart Motion Blur is a great plugin that you just add on top and just get the job done.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's give him another round of applause. And we will be back right after this quick break with our last presenter. For those of you who have not seen the magic of ZBrush and ZBrush sculpting, stay tuned for Paul Gabori. He's going to close it out with some magic of ZBrush. So check it out.